All the features and all the fun of the TRX4 for half the price? Let's find out. It's got a brushed motor, an included battery, a 2-speed transmission, and locking differentials, but it has one feature on those locking differentials that are brand new, and I cannot wait to check them out. And assuming this thing survives our initial testing, I also can't wait to add some serious power to it and see what it can really do. Before we get into any of that though, we need to take a look at this body, and I have to say, for a generic body, this is probably the nicest one I've ever seen. From the front, it kind of looks like an old Toyota Tacoma. Down the sides, it looks more similar to an old Jeep Comanche, though not quite the same. And then the tailgate in the back looks kind of like an old square body Chevy. Overall though, especially in this really nice gray color with the yellow pinstripes, I think it makes a really striking profile, and it's a good looking truck. Being a budget truck, it doesn't have a clipless body system, so it uses normal standard clips in the front and in the rear. With those clips out, the body just comes straight off, and this is a very basic body. It looks to be Lexan, and it's medium thick. I think this will hold up fine to general trail bashing. It does include a couple of hard details, such as this snorkel and mirrors. And then underneath that in the front, we do have a nice looking bumper that has light buckets for some LED lights, though there aren't any lights in this truck out of the box. I think the wheels and tires match the aesthetic really, really nicely, and I do like these black turbine style wheels. They look really modern. Though if you're familiar with crawlers or trail bashers at all, this tire pattern's gonna look pretty familiar. Other than a few minor differences, these are very similar to Proline Hyrax tires. These particular tires are 4.5 inches in diameter and are on a 2.2 inch rim. They do have a 12mm hex, and these are not beadlock tires, so these are glued on. They've got what I would consider some fairly hard foams in them, and the tires themselves are also reasonably hard, which means these should be good for trail bashing, but probably not good for serious rock crawling. I think that harder compound tire and foam choice is a good decision for a truck like this, because this thing's probably going to be used more for trail bashing than serious rock crawling. The wheel nuts are both serrated and nylock. That's nice. They shouldn't be falling off. I'm pretty confident these wheels and tires are going to hold up fine to regular bashing with the standard power system, though I am curious to see how they hold up to some serious power once we upgrade it. And of course, the real question we're going to be answering as we go through this is whether or not this thing really is a half-price TRX4 or just a cheap toy. As you can see, those wheels are riding on 12mm plastic hexes in the front as well as in the rear, though these hexes are a little bit wider in the rear. I'm not sure if that means the rear wheelbase is wider than the front wheelbase. We'll check that out in just a few minutes. One really interesting thing we can see right away is that this does not have the typical steel or aluminum ladder frame chassis like most crawlers do. Instead, it has a unique plastic chassis, which may or may not be an advantage. We've got a standard battery tray. The included battery is a 3300 milliamp hour 2S LiPo, which is a little bit smaller than the tray is. It does come with a genuine AMAS connector. In the front here, we also have a metal gear servo, which we'll take a closer look at in just a minute. We've also got a 32-turn brushed motor, which is designed for high torque, but not necessarily high speed. Again, that's something we'll be fixing in just a little bit though. Powering that, we've got a venerable WP1060 ESC from Hobbywing and a Dumbo RC receiver. This is waterproof. I don't think this is, but we'll take a closer look at that in a minute as well. For suspension, we do have some nice thick-looking oil-filled shocks and a 3-link with a panhard bar in the front with a 4-link and a panhard bar in the rear, which is interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute too. What's really interesting is we have a servo here to shift from high and low speed in the transmission, but then no additional servos for locking and unlocking the front differentials. And that's because the real party trick of this budget basher is this switch right here. As you can see, this is using pretty much all button head machine screws. They do have markings on them. In my experience, companies that bother to take the time to actually mark their screw heads are usually making better screws, though it's not guaranteed. The shocks they're using are fairly generic looking. As you can see, we've got a little bit of weeping here, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to leak in use. Changes in temperature and pressure during shipping can cause a little bit of leaking. We'll just have to see how that works when we actually get this thing out and bash it. You can see we've got a pretty good sized shock shaft here, a plastic body, and aluminum bottom and top caps. This body is not threaded, so you'd have to use preload spacers if you want to adjust that, though that's not usually that much of a problem on a crawler. One thing I noticed is that there's a lot of rebound inside this shock, and this is an effect of having a big shock piston with a fairly small shock body. When the shock shaft goes into the shock body, it's taking up physical space inside here, and the less space you have total, the higher percentage of that space it's taking up. That increases pressure inside the shock, which makes it harder to get that rebound to go away. I personally prefer to have the spring do the springing and the shock to do the shocking, but we're going to leave these just the way they are to see how it feels out of the box. These links are fairly heavy, so I believe this is steel, though it's not magnetic, so I think it's stainless steel. These rod ends look just fine. They're fairly beefy and not too sloppy out of the box. That's really important for a 4-link or even 3-link suspension. I'll mention more about that when we talk about the over-constrained rear end. But overall, these feel pretty nice, and I think they're going to hold up fine for basic budget bashing. As you can see here, those links are held in double shear, meaning there's a support on both sides of the screw. And interestingly, because this is not a steel ladder frame chassis, the cross-piece skid that holds the transmission in is a single piece with the chassis rails. As you can see, this servo does have a nice double lock metal servo horn on it. And while it doesn't look like the screw has any thread lock on it, I did smell it, and it does have that little smell of thread lock, so it looks like they just didn't use very much. Just like with the suspension links, the tie rod, drag bar, and panhard bar are made of stainless steel. The drag bar is high steer, meaning it's up out of the way, and it is in double shear, as is the panhard bar. As you can see, these are portal axles. The differential is up higher than the outputs. This 12mm hex comes right off here, and you can see there's a pretty standard cross pin holding it on. And then removing the portal box cover, you can see we have sealed bearings in here, which is a really nice touch at this budget level. The shafts are steel, and the gears themselves are sintered steel, and they do look to be pretty nicely made. This does use fairly standard kingpin style steering, though there are steel bushings in here, which should make the steering more smooth and less prone to binding. These front axles are universals, and they do look to be fairly well made. Definitely not the biggest in the world, but again, this is a budget truck. The entire front hub and knuckle, however, is held on by just one screw, which clamps onto the axle. That makes disassembly easier, but it's probably not as strong as some other designs. We do have a bearing here in the end, though, which is nice to see. That's extra support for the axle. This axle is a 2-piece design, meaning there isn't a separate center section that comes out. This is actually stronger than a 3-piece design, but means more screws to get to the differential. Pulling this housing apart, we get to see the party piece of this truck, and that's the fact that it has a selectable locking differential in the front and rear, but it doesn't use a cable to actuate it. It just uses a little switch on the outside of the housing. As you can see, that moves the fork back and forth, which moves this piece in and out, either engaging the outside of the differential housing or disengaging it, which allows for differential action or locks it out. I'm definitely curious to see how this manual locking differential feature plays out when we actually start using the truck. Obviously, you're going to have a little bit less immersion because you can't just select the lockers from your transmitter, but it's also a lot more simple and a lot cheaper, and you get most of the functionality. You'll still be able to just lock the back and do some slides and skids, lock the front and rear and do serious crawling, or unlock them and do some great trail bashing. It's going to be kind of like on old school 4-wheel drive full-size vehicles where you had to get out to unlock and lock your front hubs. As you can see here, we do have a sintered steel ring gear, though there is quite a bit of machining done on it afterward. And then inside here, we have all sintered steel gears. This is a fairly small differential, and I am a little bit concerned it's not going to be able to hold up to the high power we're going to be putting to it later, but we're just going to have to find out. All right, let me get all this put together, then let's see if we've got all steel gears in that transmission. Because of the kind of unit construction of this chassis, I'm not really sure how the transmission comes out of here. Let's start by getting this battery tray out of the way, though. Interestingly, in here we have an FMS branded 7.4 volt 3300 milliamp hour battery. This thing is pretty small and pretty thin. We definitely could put a larger battery in here, which is good because we're going to be doing that when we put a bigger power system in it. But I am curious to see what the stats on this particular battery are. It says it's 30C, but of course those C ratings are usually a lie. How much of a lie is up to this ESR meter here. This thing is basically a LiPo dyno, and whereas it doesn't tell you everything about a LiPo, it can give you a decent indication of how high quality it is. And hooking this up and testing it, we can see we are getting 49.6 amps max, or about 15C out of it. This is measuring equivalent series resistance, which is basically the ability for this thing to flow electricity through it. This will get a little bit better after the first few charges, but I wouldn't expect to see much more than 15C. Overall, though, for what this is, it'll probably be just fine. To go along with that battery, we get a charger that's slightly better looking than most of the little USB chargers we normally get. This actually plugs into the wall, and it's got some screws we can take out. While I'm taking this apart, I want to thank you guys for your awesome response in the last couple of videos. You guys seem really excited to get us to 50,000 subscribers, and you're probably pretty excited to win some cool stuff in the giveaway. If you do like winning stuff and you haven't subscribed yet, why don't you go ahead and get subscribed, because I cannot wait to get this giveaway going, but we can't do it until we hit 50K. Opening this up, as you can see, this is actually a hot RC unit. It's labeled right down here. We've got our AC side and our DC side pretty well separated out. There's a nice bit of isolation at the bottom here. Only this transformer and what looks like like an opto isolator bridges that isolation. We've got a voltage regulator on this side, and then an interesting topology. We've got 3 individual lithium ion charger chips here. The nice thing about this is because each one is charging a cell individually, it's going to be balancing while it's charging. And this design should be better than some of those basic USB chargers you get in cheaper vehicles. The datasheet for these states they also have undervoltage lockout, which means if one of your LiPo cells is too low, this charger will not charge it. This is a really important feature because when a LiPo cell drops below a certain voltage, around 2.8 volts, internal cell damage occurs. That internal cell damage can result in micro shorting at any time in the future inside the cell, which can lead to a cascade runaway thermal failure. Essentially, the battery can blow up. This is why most lithium chargers won't force charge an undervolted LiPo battery, and why it's really important not to try to force charge one that you have undervolted. If you've got a battery with a dead cell or a really low cell, just throw it away and get a new one. It's not worth burning your house down to save a $20 or $30 LiPo. This crossbar is interesting. It doesn't actually screw in itself. It just pushes into these tabs in the chassis, and then there are screws that go in above it that hold it in place. This works just fine. I've just never seen it before. With that crossbar and one more screw removed, the entire battery tray comes out. It's held under a tab back here in the back. Fairly simple, and it feels pretty robust. And that gives us a better look at the motor and transmission, which appear to just lift straight out once we unscrew it from the bottom. That's pretty simple. All right, with those screws and a couple wires disconnected, this comes right on out of here. And as you can see, it's a fairly standard looking transmission. The motor plate comes off with 2 screws. The motor mesh is adjustable, and it should be fairly easy to adjust because you can do it with this taken apart like this. That's actually a really nice touch. Looks like we've got a steel pinion gear and a sintered steel spur gear. We do have sealed bearings in here. Again, that's really nice. And now this is where everything's probably going to start flying apart. As with every time I take one of these apart, I will warn you, if you don't have to do it, don't. These can be pretty complicated and can be tricky to put back together. As you can see, there's a little spacer in there, and we've got more sintered steel gears as well as more ball bearings that are sealed. And then I presume in this section, yes, we have the high-low shifter. That looks to be all plastic, which is fine. But you can see the dog clutch there in the middle with the gears on either end. These do seem to be pretty big gears, and they look to be fairly well made. Push this back together before I can't get it together again, which may have already happened. And then in here will just be a basic geared transfer case. One thing I want to mention is that these outputs do counter rotate, which is a really nice feature. With these solid axle trucks, if you have both outputs spinning the same direction, when you accelerate, the whole truck tries to go in one way, and when you decelerate, it tries to go the other. Because these counter rotate, those forces cancel each other out, so that doesn't really happen. We've also got some pretty decent looking CVDs on the output and some fairly small drive shafts. Because these are portal axles, there's not nearly as much torque on things like this differential and in the transmission. That's because the final drive reduction happens out here at the portal boxes, and everything before that sees less torque, so it can all be smaller and lighter. Speaking of these axles, earlier I said that this rear axle is actually over-constrained because it has a 4-link and a panhard bar. Let me explain what that means. A 4-link suspension is designed to keep the axle from moving side to side while allowing it to freely move up and down and to rotate. This is achieved through triangulation of the top pair and triangulation of the bottom pair of links. Because of this, technically this rear axle can only move up and down. However, the panhard bar is connected to the chassis and to the axle, and it actually moves in an arc as it travels up and down, meaning it's pushing the axle left and right just a little bit. If you were to put this in a theoretical model, this thing would just be locked up. It wouldn't move at all. Fortunately, we don't live in theory, we live in the real world, and there's enough slop and play in these joints that it still works fine. And actually, that panhard bar makes it really stiff side to side, and even though it gives it some kind of strange geometry when it's tipping back and forth, I don't think that's going to be a problem. And the extra constraint should make this thing a little bit more stable, especially as these links wear out. All right, I know you're excited to see what this thing can do, but we've got one more thing we need to look at. I've never seen this 3115 model servo before, and I want to see what it looks like on the inside. I know some people are going to put down on the plastic chassis design of this truck, but I have to say everything being where it's supposed to be without any extra brackets or anything like that makes it easier to work on. As you can see, we do have O-rings on the screws. With those removed, we can see we have a fairly standard looking system in here. The board is just floating around, though that is pretty common, and it is conformally coated. We'll be talking a little bit more about conformal coating in a second, and it does not look like there's an O-ring on here, though this plastic does seal up pretty well, so I expect this to be at least splash resistant. And then sneaking a peek in the top, you can see we've got a brass gear here. Looking at pictures online, this is all brass gears, so this should be pretty strong, though the fact that it just has a servo horn and not a servo saver on it means it's going to be under quite a bit of stress, especially once we get this thing going even faster than it's supposed to. So we'll see how well it survives. Speaking of performance, let me get all this stuff put together and let's go bash this thing. First of all, we need to see how slow this thing can go. This is a Hobbywing 1060 ESC, so it's kind of a known quantity. This motor is not super fast. It's pretty torquey. And yeah, we've got some nice controlled travel here. This is in low gear. As you can see, that is top speed in low gear. I have to say, this truck looks so nice at this nice scale speed. I love these tires. Let's see what it can do on some slopes. This ramp is just about 45 degrees at the top. Most crawlers that I put on it are able to get all the way to the top, especially with the axles locked. We've got the axles unlocked on here, but it doesn't, nope, no, we're starting to slip. Okay, let's bring it back down. We're gonna lock the front axle and the rear, and let's try that again. Like I said, this is not quite as convenient as doing it from the transmitter, but it's really not that hard, and it is kind of a fun interaction with the truck. Plus, you know exactly what's locked and what isn't, and yeah, we're just crawling right up to the top of that, no problem whatsoever. With this light body, side hilling should be pretty good. As you can see, we're about halfway up there. A little bit further, still perfect. A little bit further up, we're getting close to 45 degrees, still holding. And then just a little bit higher than that, and yeah, it falls over. Fairly hard tires aside, I think this thing's actually gonna be pretty decent for regular rock crawling, and that's largely because of this body. Unlike most crawler bodies we get these days on RTRs that have a bunch of hard details like this roll cage on the FMS, this body is very simple Lexan and doesn't really have a whole lot to it, which means it's quite a bit lighter. While this FMS body does have lights and a few other details on it, it's definitely not the heaviest body you can get, and it weighs 1 pound 4 ounces. In contrast, the body on this truck only weighs 7.8 ounces. That's almost a full 3/4 of a pound lighter, and the weight's up top where it counts. That reduced weight should result in better rock crawling capability. I don't have a ton of rock crawling experience myself, and I don't have a huge amount of places I can rock crawl around here, but we've got a few options, and we can definitely see how this thing works. Overall, so far, it feels pretty good. Again, that's to my completely amateur experience, but this is nice and slow. I've got both differentials locked, and it seems to be handling these rocks pretty well. It's got nice control. I'm not really feeling any instability. This is getting a little bit steeper. Might fall over on us here. Still trying, still gripping. Oh yeah, it got it. That's actually really nice. Again, I am not an expert at rock crawling, but this thing seems to be handling it relatively well, especially with these fairly hard tires. That was very, very easy. Now in a little more of an urban crawling setting, which is what I'm used to, let's see if we can get up this curb. Yeah, it's handling that really, really nicely. I'm actually impressed with these tires. I was expecting them not to do very well, again, because they're harder than regular rock crawler tires, but the lightweight body, look at that. This thing is super stable and seems to be working very, very well. Let's see how she handles a sheer ledge. I have to say, this truck is so beautiful. I love watching it crawl. And yeah, look at that, walking right up that ledge, no problem whatsoever. I am very impressed with this. Again, within the limits of my understanding of crawling, this thing seems to be really, really capable, especially for the fact that we can now put it in second gear and go quite a bit faster. Obviously, this isn't as fast as it's gonna be when we get that brushless system in it, but let's see what its 3S top speed is out of the box. All right, fully charged 3S battery. Now, being a trail basher, I'm not expecting huge numbers from this thing, but it does feel just about in line with what I would expect, and it's actually pretty stable. It's got a nice slide to it. I do have the differentials locked right now. We'll try it with just the rear diff locked in a minute, but for now, let's see what kind of speed we get. 9 miles an hour, that's pretty much what I was expecting. Can we do donuts? Oh yeah, we can do donuts, and that's with the front and rear diff locked. Let me unlock the front diff, which we can do by just flipping this switch, and that should make donuts a little easier. Oh yeah, she likes donuts. This thing actually slides around pretty good on 3S for the power this has. It's handling very, very well. This is probably one of the flattest handling crawlers I've ever seen, and it's almost certainly due to that really light body and fairly stiff suspension. I think this thing's gonna handle more power really, really well. Rougher off-road also seems to do pretty darn well. This is some fairly rough dirt here, and with just the rear differential locks, we can get good steering action. It's doing a pretty good job. Honestly, this is probably one of the best trail bashers I think I've ever felt, and for the money, this thing is really, really cool. Now with things a little bit slower and moving into the woods, this thing really does look like it's in its element. I love this gray body. Let me know what you think about the color scheme. What color would you pick if you were to get one of these? This thing really does look awesome in this gray though. I haven't seen another truck in this color scheme before, and this kind of just bouncing around in the woods is a really nice, calm, relaxing thing to do. It's definitely a totally different feeling from what you get when you're doing serious hardcore bashing. Oh, I might need to lock up that front differential again. With that locked, let's see if we can get over this. No problem whatsoever. I've got a couple couple packs through this thing now, and so far, guys, I have to say, I am pretty darn impressed with it. On 3S, this power system has plenty of jam for trail bashing and doing donuts in the dirt. This servo felt really good as well, and this included transmitter is one I've seen on plenty of vehicles before, and I've liked it on every one of them. We've got plenty of adjustability, plenty of range, and it seems relatively responsive. With that being said, I'd like it to have a little bit more low speed sensitivity and a little bit more top speed, which is why we're gonna go ahead and put this Quick Run Fusion Pro in here. This is a 2300 kV motor and ESC in one, and this should be a perfect upgrade for this trail basher. Hopefully we can get this motor swapped out without having to take the whole transmission out of here. First, we need to take out this screw. We should be able to get to it with this ball-tipped MIP bit. We're definitely going to be giving some of these away in that 50K giveaway. That worked, though all these ball-tip hexes tend to chew up the heads of screws, so be careful when you use them. And then we've got one more we can get to straight from the front. With those two screws out, we can wiggle the motor out, which is really, really easy. We're also going to need this second gear so we can set our mesh properly. But first, we need to take this plate off and then remove the motor mount. I chose a 2300 kV motor to replace this 32-turn brushed motor. There is no direct translation from turns to kV because turns discusses the amount of physical windings inside here, while kV is the result of volts applied to the motor, so they can't be directly translated, though by my estimates, the top speed of this should be a little bit faster than this, and because it's FOC, it'll give us better low-speed control. Since the Hobbywing is designed to be a direct replacement for these brushed systems, the stock pinion should fit right on there, which it does, and now we just need to put this piece on here, and we can set the mesh just like that. And I have to say, this is probably one of the easiest meshes to set in the hobby. Everything's right here in front of you, and it's really easy to get the screws lined up and tightened. Very nice. Before we install it in the truck, though, there's one more thing I want to do. In the manual for this YK41011, really snappy name, YiKong. Definitely like the naming convention. It doesn't say anywhere in here that this thing is waterproof, and I'm pretty sure that this Dumbo RC receiver isn't waterproof, but we can make it at least a bit more water resistant fairly easily. And I think that's worth doing because the Fusion system is IP67 waterproof. And with that out of there, the case just snaps apart, and I was going to conformally coat this board, but as you can see, it's already been conformally coated. If you pulled the board out and it wasn't shiny looking like this, you could just get some conformal coating or even some nail polish, coat the whole thing up really well, and that'll make it at least splash resistant. Nail polish is basically nitrocellulose, and it's not going to last nearly as long as real conformal coating, but it will last a while, and I've done it before with no issues whatsoever. This one, though, is already water resistant. Of course, we're also not going to need this ESC, so we can rip this on out of here as well. If you wanted to upgrade just the performance and features without going full brushless, you could get the WP1080 ESC. It's only about $50 and does work quite a bit better than this 1060 while giving you a lot more adjustability. Installation of this is just going to be the reverse of removal, and just like that, this thing is ready to rock. And without an ESC that's separate, it's quite a bit more simple and tidy. Because of a feature that Hobbywing calls RPM matching, I can keep a constant throttle position, and this thing's going to crawl right up this roll of solder. That's because it's keeping a steady RPM on the motor rather than applying a specific amount of current to the motor. That type of system makes crawling a lot easier. And as you may or may not be able to see, this system can crawl incredibly slowly. All right, fresh 3S battery, let's see what we get. That's definitely faster, though. It's not the fastest in the world. Let's see if we can get a nice full speed pass here. Here we go, full throttle. Nice and stable. Definitely not fast, but faster than it was before for sure. Let's see what we got. All right, 14 miles an hour. That is definitely better. Now with the ESC set up for normal bashing, I have to say this thing feels pretty peppy and pretty good. I am really enjoying this little truck. It feels more like a little basher than a rock crawler, and even though it was able to do some rock crawling, I bet we can even jump this thing. Oh, she jumps awesome. That was fantastic. We gotta do that again. Get her lined up. We'll go full throttle here. Obviously, we're in high gear. Differentials are unlocked, and this thing jumps absolutely wonderfully. This is the best jumping crawler I've ever tried. Usually, they'll go nose down on you, and they won't be super stable in the air, but this thing jumps awesome. Let's try it off the big jump one time. Perfect. Look at that. This thing actually handles well, and it seems to be pretty darn durable too. I don't think they expected this thing to be running brushless and jumping 3 or 4 feet in the air, but there it goes, and it lands on its wheel. That light body means it really doesn't want to roll over, and this is one of the most fun solid axle bashers I've ever tried. With the brushed motor, obviously it's not going to have quite as much jam, but it will still have good punch and drivability. You might not be able to jump it quite as well. Oh, one on the roof there. But I would say overall, this is a very versatile truck and seems to be able to do pretty much everything. One more jump. Yeah, this thing is fun. So there we go, guys, the YiKong YK41011. At $250 with a battery and charger, I think this thing's kind of a no-brainer. The 2-speed transmission makes it super versatile. The manually locking front and rear differentials are more simple than cable-operated servo-driven ones. And whereas they aren't quite as convenient as doing it from the transmitter, this does make you kind of more involved with the vehicle, and it is fun. Overall, again, especially for the price, there's really not too much to complain about with this truck. Of course, since this isn't a Traxxas, you might have more problems getting parts, especially long term. There probably aren't going to be a ton of upgrades available for it, but as long as you don't mind those limitations, and especially given the fact this thing seems pretty durable, this is a heck of a deal, and I recommend picking one up. These videos being free is also a heck of a deal, and I recommend watching one.